Last week, Easter Sunday, as opposed to the entire season of Easter, we established something. If we didn't establish it, let's establish it definitely here this morning. That far from being resurrection, far from being an event that happened to Jesus 2,000 years ago and will happen to us hopefully sometime in the future, Easter resurrection is more something that we practice that is a current reality. So if we didn't make that clear last week, we'll make that clear this morning. Easter is not just a holiday, it's a current reality. It's the reality that God continues to try to establish in our midst through us. See, there's the kind of the hook, right? It's not just that God drops Easter on us, although it does feel like that. Isn't that first Easter, nobody expected it. Even though Jesus said, resurrection is in the offing, right? On the third day, I'll be raised. The disciples didn't hear that. The Jewish authorities didn't hear that. So it wasn't until it actually came true that some people had the opportunity to be embraced by that new reality. But God now brings that resurrection life into the world through us. And we talked last week about something that we called practicing resurrection. What we want to do as followers of Jesus is to practice resurrection. And we didn't have a lot of time to talk about that. So this morning I'm going to share a little bit more about that. And then I'll be done, because we have a lot to do, and I just want to give you some thoughts to get you thinking. So what does it mean to practice resurrection? Well, today we have a great example of what that means as we celebrate Earth Sunday together. As you know, and if you read the news, the predictions about the future of life on Earth as we know it are pretty bad. They're pretty dire. And disturbing, deeply disturbing. If you believe the science. Now, some people don't believe the science, and I don't really want to debate that with you now. That wouldn't be appropriate. But if you believe the science, then the future of life on Earth is looking a little scary, or very scary. So today we remember that God has given us responsibility to care for the earth. That it's not ours to use up and destroy, but it's rather ours to nurture. It says it right there in Genesis. If we want to go back to the beginning and some of the original commission that God gave to us, God commissions us to be stewards, caretakers of the earth. The dominion of which we hear so much in some translations of Genesis isn't ownership or exploitation. It's more like being a gardener of the earth. It's taking responsibility for it. It's caring for it so that it might grow and be able to sustain life as God has created it on this earth. So I think it's what the Environmental Stewardship Committee did is really cool, because it gives us some pretty clear images of, at least an image of what it means to be caretakers. We need to continue to plant and grow and nurture and be good stewards of the earth that God has given us. And as we do that, we practice resurrection. To practice resurrection, or to think in a resurrection frame of mind, is always to give ourselves over to that which is life-affirming and life-producing. If we're not doing that, then what we're doing is practicing death in whatever way that we happen to be doing that. When Sigmund Freud came up with some of his theories of human development, what we often hear about is his theory of Eros, which is really the life impulse. But he also said that alongside of that is a death impulse, an impulse towards death, and he called that, the Greek word for death, he called that thanatos. He said we have an inclination towards death. And what we as people of faith affirm is that we need to yield more of ourselves over to that inclination towards life, to practice resurrection, so that when we're being judgmental of other people, we're really practicing that death impulse. We're letting that have the way with us. And what we want to do is be more open to God helping us to practice more of the life impulse, more of that which is affirming. And sometimes that means bringing a great deal of awareness and consciousness into the things that we say and do. And to do that with prayer. Because we know that as much as we might try of our own resources to affirm life, to be more open-minded, to be more gracious, to be more loving, often things happen to us that will derail us, that will take us off track. And that often happens because we're trying to do it with our own energy, our own, if I just I can be better today. I can do better. And then when that fails, we kind of get set back a great deal. And I think part of the reason for that is something that Jesus says in this morning's reading from John's Gospel. It's not a matter of us independently trying to practice resurrection. We practice resurrection as we're in touch with the one who is the resurrection and the life, namely Jesus. He says very clearly in there, I am the vine, you are the branches. If we want things to grow, they need to be in a place where they're enabled to grow. They need to have deep soil or good water, and so they will put down both root and branch. And Jesus says, I am the vine, I'm the root, I'm the base, and you are the branches. And he says most importantly there in John 15, abide in me. Abide. That's a good kind of King James word. We don't use that word much in our thinking anymore, but there's a reason that when the New Revised Standard Version was translated, they kept the word abide, because live wasn't communicative enough. It didn't really convey the sense of what abide means. To abide somewhere means you put down roots. You really invest yourself in that place in which you abide. And so Jesus says, abide, put down roots in me. Essentially what he's saying there is exactly what we've been talking about for the past 2 Sundays, that to abide in Jesus is to put down roots in resurrection, is to affirm life, is to not give in to the impression that we sometimes have and that which sometimes the world around us would give us, that life is limited. Or rather to see that with God there is no limit to the gift of life that God would give us. I have a perfect example, and I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but yesterday we celebrated the life of Allison Bankus, Barbara Cunningham's sister-in-law, who died last Sunday. And I found out this week that Allison was born on Easter, 1949, and died on Easter, 2014. And I was talking to your neighbor afterwards, and I said both her birthdays were on Easter. She was born to life on Easter. She was born to eternal life on Easter. God, in God's abundance, provided for Allison, and in those 2 dates, gave me anyway, an image of what abundant life is, of what it means to practice resurrection. And Allison was about that. We heard so much about her life yesterday and celebrated the goodness that she brought into so many people's lives, the fun, the joy, the challenge that she was. And that's kind of what we're talking about today, both in an environmental stewardship way, but just in the general practice of how we live. We're invited to practice a life of resurrection. We're invited to resist those forces that would pull us down to thinking only of death and limitation and endings and insufficiency, and instead, in this Easter season, we are reoriented again towards abiding, living, putting roots down in the reality of God's promise of love and a future and new birth. And we heard it again, God makes all things new. God continues to make us and the earth new if we will give ourselves over to that reality. So my encouragement to you and to myself is that as you abide in Jesus through worship, through prayer, you would find yourself more and more practicing in your daily life the reality of resurrection. Because that is, as the writer of Timothy says, that is life that really is life. It's life that goes on. It's life that continues. It's life that's new and continues to grow and reinvigorate itself because God's presence is in it. So my encouragement to you is that you would continue in your life of faith, in your interaction with others and with the earth, to practice resurrection.